Okay guys, welcome back to Reach Out Reptiles, a place where we help you connect with the wild within you that really makes you human. In this segment, Free Tip Friday, what I'm doing is listening to you guys. What do you want to know? What do you want to hear? What are your questions for retic breeders, especially, Super Dwarf retic breeders or any kind of snake? This week, we are going to talk about feeding schedules for Super Dwarf Reticulated pythons and also kind of address the theory or myth that food can control the size of the growth of your snake. Okay, now this was requested by Matt and Joseph, and several other people have talked to me about this too, so I thank you guys for your comments. And again, the rest of you guys, if you have a question, comment below, and then make sure to subscribe. And I'll see you guys next Friday, and hopefully we'll get around to your question. Okay, so back to the issue at hand. Feeding schedule for Super Dwarf and Dwarf Retics. This is a little bit of a controversial subject because a lot of people have their own theories. So I'm going to just go ahead and share mine and give you some real-life examples from my collection and in my experience, and we're going to talk about this issue. Yes. You definitely can control the size of your snake with a feeding schedule. That being said, I can control my size with a feeding schedule as well. I could easily be 50 pounds lighter or 50 pounds heavier, but are either of those extremes healthy? Probably not. I'm sure I could stand to lose a few pounds, but it's mostly the camera adding those 10 pounds. So let's talk about body types in Super Dwarfs first of all. A lot of people that get into Super Dwarfs are coming from ball pythons. Maybe they're coming from mainland reticulated pythons, Burmese pythons, boa constrictors. All of these kinds of animals have very different body types and body styles than the Super Dwarf Reticulated python. A Super Dwarf should look like a marathon runner. Lean muscle, they're very thin, they're very lean, they're very muscular, they're extremely strong. It's amazing how far they can stretch out, going from one branch to another or from my hand to my desk or whatever the case may be. So this is the type of body style we want them to have. Okay, you ready? I'm going to try to show you with a cheap, easy illustration the kind of body size we're looking for on a Super Dwarf Reticulated python. Thickest part of the snake is going to be that middle third. This part and this part are going to be nice and lean. Now, Super Dwarf Reticulated python number 2 is fed a good sized, large meal once a week, like a mainland retic or a ball python or a boa or something like that. What they're going to end up with is this head that has very little neck definition. Okay, it's not like this one where it pinches off with these cute pudgy cheeks. You know what I mean? Look how adorable this snake is over here. This snake is El Gordo, and he's just getting a little bit too chunky. He's also, he's probably pretty sad. Those are my sad snake eyes. Okay, because he's unhealthy, has labored breathing and difficulty getting around, very lazy. Nice thing is they won't push their nose, which you always hear people say, feed them more so they don't push their nose. But if they're pushing their nose, there's probably something else environmentally wrong. So what we want to do is not feed once a week to get them looking no neck definition, and then they're going to get pretty fat. And the funny thing is with an obese snake, it's going to be longer than my camera can even show, but with an obese snake, they actually get, they get that pear-shaped body, like my 7th grade English teacher, where they get bigger and bigger, and then they kind of taper off down at the tail. This is what a healthy blood python should look like, but not a Super Dwarf. So over here, the thickest part of the snake is this first third. The thickest part of this obese snake over here is much further down towards the end of the animal. Okay? Now, just to illustrate my point, everybody knows red is bad. Don't push the red button. Please don't make your Super Dwarf look like this 7th grade teacher. What you do want, green is good, it means go, drive fast, pedal to the metal. This is what we want. A semi-arboreal looking survivor of a snake that has lean muscle built up. It's ready for anything. It should be highly active, very inquisitive, ready to explore, awesome for a display cage. That's what we want. These are super dwarfs. This is why we do it. They're not like everything else. They're unique. They're awesome. They're fun. They're different. And there's still so much to learn. Okay, so we've got that covered. Now, let's take a look at some of these animals and see exactly what we're talking about. Okay, let's take a look at animal number 1. Now, this is an animal that was not raised here at Reach Out Reptiles, but she is a very high percentage dwarf and super dwarf animal. It's actually 50% super dwarf, 25% Jampea, and related to all the snow stuff running around out there. Look at this monster. She was fed once a week, a meal you would think is appropriate for most of your large constrictors, but look at this chub. She's got fat hanging out everywhere. Her back end is just saggy like a blob, and here you can see what I'm talking about with the neck. There's no definition between her head and her neck. Alright, this next animal is actually a breeding from an animal of the previous line bred into a mainland, so it has literally half the dwarf and super dwarf bloodline of the previous animal. This should theoretically be a much larger animal, but it shows that with a good feeding schedule, these are very reasonably sized creatures. Look at that tight muscle tone, nice and lean, very thin. Unlike the first animal, which was just artificially pushed to its max, this animal was allowed to grow to the size that its genetics call for. I don't know if you can tell the difference there, but on the right, very healthy. On the left, terrible. Now, just to really blow your mind, let me pull out an animal with fantastic genetics raised with this same type of a feeding schedule. This is an 87.5% super dwarf animal. So it is higher percentage through very selective breeding. And there's nothing to do with diet keeping this animal smaller. If you look, she's still thick, very muscular. She has a very similar body shape to the animal I just had out a second ago. But she's just basically a corn snake, and this is a 2-year-old super dwarf. Almost pure super dwarf. And it just does not have this 7th grade teacher booty. Alright guys, so it's going to come down to frequency. How often should you be feeding these animals? Now, every kind of baby is going to grow faster than an adult. Take the last couple of months, for example. I had a baby human born at the end of November. He is now more than double his birth weight. If I doubled my weight in a couple of months, it would be pretty grotesque, okay? That being said, we're going to feed an appropriately sized meal to a super dwarf or dwarf reticulated python about once every 5 days to once a week. And we're going to want to do that during the period of time they're getting established. So if you've just received a new animal in the mail and you want to establish him into a new environment, once a week is a great feeding schedule. It's regular. You could even do once every 5 days. And they're going to appreciate it. Their lives revolve around food. And so they're going to absolutely love you for it. The difference between your super dwarf growing up and your ball python, your mainland reticulated python, or your boa, is that any of those latter three are going to convert calories into growth. Very quickly in a super dwarf's life, it's going to slow down on the length that it is able to achieve. And when you see an exponential change in girth versus length, and they're outside of that ratio of how long to how wide should they be, that's when you start to get an unhealthy snake. Now, on the other side of things, you don't want to starve a snake. Please don't take an animal and just feed it the minimum amount for it to survive so that you can keep it small. That's the same theory as saying, I'm going to buy a baby alligator and never feed it and it'll stay small its whole life. Yeah, it probably will, but the effects of that are going to be a much shorter life, and you're stunting it. You're absolutely hurting and malnutritioning that animal after a certain period of time. What we want is a healthy, happy medium. Now with pure super dwarfs, this is 100% Kalatoa, Madu, Karampa locality, something like that. In my experience, they start to increase in girth over length at around 6 months of age when you're feeding them. They start to look pudgy. So at about 6 months of age, I'm going to slow mine down to the same size meal, but about once every 10 days. Now, I don't want them to lose girth either. If they're losing girth, we know we're not feeding them enough, and we need to beef them back up so that they're not getting skinny. There's not a lot of good information about super dwarfs out there on the internet. So I don't know what it is, but people are ingrained that they have to feed once a week, all the time, forever. That is not a good feeding schedule for a super dwarf. But we're going to decrease when they turn 2 to once every 2 weeks. Is that easy enough? After their second birthday, they're going to get fed once every 2 weeks. Same size meal. Just a little bit bigger than the girth at the midsection, so you have a lump the next day and it's gone the second. At that point in time, they're going to continue to grow and add length, but we want to watch that girth. And from 2 to 3, they're really kind of finishing up on growing. They'll only slowly add length after 3 years old, very, very slowly. And we want to maintain good body, nice, lean, solid muscle like a super dwarf should have. So after their third birthday, I'm going to cut them back to once every 3 weeks on food. Now, breeding is another story. Because super dwarfs are so driven by food, when it comes time to breed a female, we're going to cycle with food. So we'll probably give them the same number of meals in a given year, a breeding year, that would average out to once every 3 weeks. But what we're going to do is spread it real thin during the year when they're not breeding, and then pack it in heavier right before they breed and also after they lay, so that they can regain that ideal weight. Now again, I know there are a lot of theories about snake growth, caloric intake, and feeding schedules. And this is my theory, and based on my experience, I invite you, please comment below with what you think. If you disagree with me, comment below. If you think this is a good idea and it's given you something to think about, comment below. The whole point of this is for us to be sharing information that benefits our animals. No man is an island. Nobody's learned this all on their own. There isn't any book written about these guys, and we're still doing a lot of investigative keeping. But the general idea that I want you to take home is this. Study pictures of the animals you're keeping and what they look like in the wild, and strive to get them to look like that in captivity. If they look very different in captivity than the way they would look where they were naturally placed and designed to live, something is wrong. Again, if you have a fat snake, you're going to have the same problem as you get with unhealthy, overweight people, which is going to be, digestive issues. They're going to have definite reproductive issues, is probably the biggest thing in super dwarfs. Shortened lifespan, labored breathing. The list goes on and on and on. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really hope this helped. Hey, have an awesome weekend. I love you guys. We'll see you next Friday.